Again, let's keep that chat active. If you resonate with something, give us some reactions, throw something in the chat. Let's stump Alex, all right? Let's play a game of Stump the Lawyer in the chat, all right? So guys, welcome. This is another episode of 614 Startups Live. My name is Elio Harmon, host of the 614 Startups podcast, and I took Ben's crazy invitation to host a live show. So this is my best impersonation of a live host. In the chat, do you guys think I could do ESPN live? Let me know. Let me know. All right. Rate my skills as a live host. All right. Tonight, we are doing legal do's and don'ts. And I have a very special guest, my man, Alex Brown from Dickinson Wright. Alex, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks, Ela. Thanks for having me. And on behalf of my colleagues and partners at Dickinson Wright, we're thrilled to be here. But what would a legal conversation be without some disclaimers? So everything that I say here is just Alex Brown talking, my personal opinion, not the views of Dickinson Wright. Also, don't rely on anything I say. And if you do choose to rely on anything I say, don't you dare sue me for malpractice, because only my paying clients can sue me for malpractice.
Listen, right out of the gate with a disclaimer, I like it. Should I have given any disclaimers, man? Let me know. Oh, I did a good disclaimer because this is being recorded. That was impromptu. I remembered that. So that's a disclaimer. Yeah. All right. So we're off on a good feet, off on a good foot. All disclaimers covered. All right. For folks who don't know you, why don't you share a bit of your background with us?
Yeah. So I've been an attorney for a little over 20 years, always here in Columbus, Ohio, even though I'm not a native, having graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, all the way on the West Coast, and then went to law school on the East Coast. But settled here in the Midwest because this was a lifestyle decision. I thought the Midwest had a lot of positive attributes, and I didn't have to live in a crazy city where I couldn't afford to buy a house or commute to work. So I decided to get into advising scalable startups, particularly those that are in the software and technology industry, because I was a corporate attorney, and there's a lot of corporate attorneys, but not a lot of people doing corporate and IP and software and technology, also coupled with venture capital. So I've been doing that primarily for a number of years, representing companies from an idea to startup all the way through rapid growth, venture capital, private equity backed, acquiring other companies, and then hopefully a lucrative exit for the entrepreneurs and founders and everybody else involved once the company achieves success.
That's awesome, Alex. Now, why Columbus, right? So you go to Cal. Are you from Columbus, the Midwest in general? What brought you here?
So I grew up in Germany as a military brat. My parents were teachers for the military schools. So I stayed in Germany for 14 years between ages of 4 and 18. And then when I decided to go to college, I had in-state residency. So I went to the best state school I could, which is California, Berkeley. And that was really even though I was born in Los Angeles, I left there at 4, so I didn't know it. As an adult coming back to the Bay Area, and I saw what it was like, I'm like, I don't think I want to live here. This is too hard. It's too crazy. I want to go someplace that's a little bit less crazy. And after going to law school, I realized I didn't like big cities. I didn't like places like New York, DC. Even after they're fun places to visit, not so fun to work and live. And I did my research, and frankly, had some connection, some family connection to Ohio. Had never set foot in Columbus until I was recruited by a law firm. Came here, absolutely loved it, and made this my life. Dragged my then girlfriend, now wife, out here, and she stopped calling Columbus the hellhole after a couple of years, and now she drinks the Kool-Aid as well.
Yeah, man, it's hard not to drink the Kool-Aid, man, because the Kool-Aid here, and I want to get your feedback on that. So when you first, what year was this when you moved here originally?
Oh, now you're dating me, but yeah, I started here in 1999. That's when I graduated law school. So I got my education a century ago.
Okay. And let's talk startup action, man, since you focused on the startup world. What was the startup action like in 99 versus what we're seeing in 2021?
Yeah, so back then it was it wasn't even close to what we see now, what we're experiencing now. And I think one of the big reasons was Ohio's Third Frontier program, which was that $1.5 billion bond program to try to turn our economy away from manufacturing and pivot it more towards technology, software, scalability, that kind of stuff. So as a young attorney working for big banks and stuff, doing their technology and software deals, all of a sudden I had this skill set that was relatable to the Third Frontier funded companies and all these startups that were getting spun out of, Battelle and Ohio State, healthcare institutions, and getting funded with Third Frontier money. And they needed, attorneys who weren't too expensive and knew a little bit about, technology, IP, that kind of stuff. So that's really, I think, what I was there at the right place at the right time with Third Frontier, and Ohio had a competitive advantage for a long time and still does, based on Third Frontier. Other states didn't do it, and as a result, I think we've really gained on them.
Okay, well, let's get right into it. I think we have enough background, we have enough perspective. Let's get into the topic at hand, which is legal do's and don'ts, all right? How to set up your company right. Let's jump. Corporation. Shaz in the chat is a former startup employee turned recent founder, and she's now thinking about how to incorporate right. So where would you like to start that conversation? What are some of the things that founders need to be thinking about when setting up their company?
Yeah, so you always form an entity. If you're going to do business, do it through a business entity, to be sure. That's always the answer. You never want to do it as an individual. You don't want to do it with other people as a partnership, because then the liabilities of the business become the liabilities of the person. And you don't want to expose your personal assets and your personal liability any more than you absolutely have to. So the answer is always form a company. The question then becomes, well, what type of company? Where should I form it? If you Google this, you're going to get a lot of answers that are inappropriate. You may guess correctly and end up at the right answer, but very often it's always more nuanced. There's a reason why people like me are employed, and it's because these things are a little bit more challenging, and it's hard to do self-help here and get it correct. Instead, what I try to do is I do a risk assessment, do some advice with my clients, try to get from them what their significant needs and concerns are, and then give them the pros and cons about direction to go. So a conversation I would have with an entrepreneur or a group of entrepreneurs about what they want to do, we would get quickly into, well, what type of entity makes the most sense? And if this is a company that's going to be doing their own thing, maybe getting their own financing, self-funding, for example, you'd probably really want to think a lot about forming a limited liability company as opposed to a corporation. And the reason for that is LLCs are disregarded tax entities. The taxes are paid at your personal level as opposed to the company level. A corporation pays tax at the corporate level, and then they also pay tax whenever distributions are made. So sometimes that's called double taxation. But all startups will lose money early on, right? If you do a startup and you start making money immediately, making a profit immediately, good for you. Most don't do that. And so the losses that you can take advantage of as a member of an LLC, that applies to your personal tax level. Whereas with a corporation, those losses just get carried forward at the entity level until the company actually makes a profit. So, if somebody says, Alex, well, we have to get venture capital financing, we have to get lots of money right away, that's when you actually might want to think about a Delaware C corporation. And we can talk about why Delaware or Ohio. But if you are going to get investor money, smart institutional money, almost always you need to be a C corporation, and preferably a Delaware C corporation, because investors don't want to be members of an LLC. They don't want to be partners. They don't want to get a K-1. They want the ability to reinvest some of their proceeds, and that only happens really with a Delaware or any type of C corporation.
All right, so just for me, I like to put things in buckets. All right, so for my bootstrappers out there, right, we're thinking more LLC, right? But I'm going to go venture capital, try to scale this thing quickly. We'll put you in the corporation bucket. And Shaz, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. So give me the thumbs up right now saying, hey, go ahead and pick on me, okay? All right, Shaz gave us the permission. So in the chat, Shaz put in, my company is a closed social network to help parents find safe and fast childcare, okay? When I hear anything that has to do with children, I think, oh my God, childcare, liability. Let's talk a little bit about, even if she was bootstrapping, and we would typically put her in that LLC category, when you look at other factors regarding risk mitigation, being a middle person around childcare, does that change the conversation?
Not really, because, it actually might, and strange enough, it might promote an LLC more. And the reason for that is, it's a lot harder to screw up an LLC, whereas a corporation has a lot of formalities. You got to have shareholders that elect a board of directors. You got to have all these officers. You got to have board meetings and shareholder meetings and resolutions and a minute book and a secretary and a president and a treasurer. So it's easier to screw up the corporate formalities of a corporation, a lot harder to do that with an LLC. So an LLC is an easier entity to live with from a formality point of view. But if you're successfully operating either an LLC or a corporation, that entity, that business entity, should be a prophylactic with respect to liability. It should shield personal owners from the liabilities of the entity, as long as the entity is behaving like an entity. It has its own, checking account. You actually disclose that it's either an LLC or an Inc. in the name and the advertising. You've got business cards or an email footer that actually has the company name and an Inc. or LLC. You're putting people on notice that they're not dealing with you as an individual. They're dealing with you as a representative of a company. And that company, just like in the name of LLC, limited liability company, it's designed to keep liability at that entity level and try to impair or prevent it from getting down to the personal level, which is very important. But in addition to the actual entity, you're probably going to want to get business insurance, commercial general liability insurance. Your homeowner's personal insurance doesn't cover you for business activities for the most part. So get yourself some good, commercial insurance to cover your commercial liabilities in addition to forming the entity. Those would be two safe bets for limiting your liability, especially in a potentially high risk area such as childcare.
Yeah, I appreciate that nuance there, adding some context to that. But I like that the LLC is holding up so far, right? There's this kind of, hey, I want to start a startup. I need to start a Delaware corporation. That's not really the case. And that's where good advice comes into play. So when people think legal, they think, oh, that's going to cost a lot of money. Now, let me hear your perspective on the cost-saving options out there that people generally go to first, because in their mind, getting someone like you on the line is going to cost them an arm and a leg. So what are your feelings on startups going to like a LegalZoom or a Rocket Lawyer and trying to incorporate as a first step?
Yeah, so a lot of those services are, they're better than nothing, and that's sort of damning with faint praise. But they certainly have aggregated, resources and ability to get sort of the same or routine matters done on an efficient basis. So if you're a somewhat more seasoned entrepreneur and you need to form a company quickly and you kind of already know what entity you want, what you want it to look like, that can be a useful tool. If you're somebody who's learning on the job, that might be less of a useful tool. But for simple stuff, the stuff that's the same, one size fits all, then it's not so bad. Where folks like me come in would be when you actually want it more tailored. So it's not a one size glove. It's a bespoke glove that will fit and work and move and protect your hand as best as possible. So we are expensive. There's no question about it. All attorneys are expensive. If I were in New York City, I'd be probably at least twice as expensive as my current Midwest rate. So the good news for a lot of the entrepreneurs that are watching this, you happen to be at a relatively low cost legal environment, which is to your benefit. And a buck goes a longer way here. And that also is true when it comes to when you raise money. That dollar raised will take longer to spend than it does in New York or San Francisco, for example. So yeah, we're expensive, but I would recommend that you spend a little bit on the front end. That usually reaps a lot of dividends on the back end when you don't have to redo it, or if you've gone down a path and you have to pivot and then go down to the correct path. That's usually more expensive than doing it correctly the first time.
All right. Well, in the chat, if anybody feels comfortable or feels better about the fact that Alex is only charging half the price he would charge if he was in New York, put in the chat, yes, Alex. Thank you so much. That's so reassuring, okay? Because we know he's not moving to Alabama. So get the Columbus prices while you can. All right. Let's talk about.
We do have a really good comment in here, and this is about having your cake and eating it too. And a very astute comment about if you form an LLC and use it for a while, maybe taking advantage of those losses, Later, when an investor says, I would prefer if you were a corporation, you can actually convert your LLC into a C corporation, and you can convert an Ohio LLC into a Delaware C corporation. Now, there is a little bit of expense associated with that, but usually, you're getting a significant investment. So you're really spending the investor dollars to do that conversion. Moreover, you're getting that investment in so you can start spending more to do the compliance stuff, all the governance annoyances that we talked about. So the nice thing is you can choose to go LLC, but you can actually later pivot and convert into a C corporation when it makes more sense.
All right, so I think Shaz is clapping. She got what the answer she was looking for. And you did mention you are about to officially form the entity. So perfect time to reach out to Alex, okay, Shaz? Now you guys are like friends. You're like homies at this point. So you should reach out to him. All right, let's continue the conversation from the perspective of founders, right? So if you're starting a business, maybe it's just you, single member LLC, or a solo founder. What if you have co-founders in terms of an entity that best serves that purpose when you're talking about equity, ownership, et cetera? And then we're gonna kind of continue that conversation into vesting. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that?
So, whenever you are dealing with a partner or multiple partners, it's similar to a business marriage. You are getting married to a business partner. And so I would always recommend that you actually have a business prenuptial agreement with those business partners. You want to make decisions when everybody's on the same page. You don't want to have to come up with decisions, especially if one or more of your business partners don't like the results of those decisions when you're facing that inflection or difficult point. So come to an agreement when everybody's on the same page and is drinking the same Kool-Aid to understand what happens in certain circumstances. For example, if your business say you're 50-50, two business partners and they each own an equal share of the company. What happens if one of you says yes and the other says no on an issue? That's called deadlock. So how do you resolve that deadlock? As you might imagine, when you are facing the deadlock, then it's getting heated. One party firmly believes that they should be no, the other party firmly believes that should be yes. If you've already set up that resolution, and I've seen resolutions, involving coin flips when it's truly 50-50. But if you set up a resolution, the rules of the game, your business partners will abide by those rules of the game, and that resolves deadlock. But what happens if you're with two other partners? So there's three owners of the business. And one of those partners gets a sweet job with a whole bunch of money and flies off to Atlanta. And you're like, wait a minute, 1/3 of the company now lives in Atlanta and isn't doing anything for our company anymore. We can't afford that. Approaching that person and saying, hey, would you give us back our equity? They're probably going to politely decline. Now, if you had set up rules in that business prenuptial agreement that says, if you're no longer doing full-time work for the company, we can buy you out at $100, $1,000, insert formula here. All of a sudden, you got these rules of the game where you can use that to resolve the issue and address a circumstance that popped up. A final example would be if you're in business with somebody and that person is married and then gets a divorce, depending on the state, all of a sudden you're in business with that person's spouse. What happens then? If you have a good business prenuptial agreement, you might have the ability to, pull back that stock, to buy back that stock. So at least you can assure yourself as to who you're doing business with, not that person's ex-spouse. But early on would be the time to actually sit down and craft up a business prenuptial agreement with a LLC. That'd usually be an operating agreement. And with a corporation, that would be what's called a stockholders agreement.
Man, listen, I should have better feelings about marriage because I'm happily married. But when you compared it to a marriage, my initial thing was like, yeah, get a prenup, right? So let's talk about statistics, right? Because if 50% of marriages break up, have you kind of in legal circles, is there a number out there for how many partnerships in businesses that actually break up? Because a 50-50 chance that you're going to break up with somebody, you need all the paperwork. Do you have any stats on that?
I don't have actual stats, but I can make some up on the fly. And I would say close to 100% of businesses go through significant change. So unlike a marriage in the United States, which is binary, 1 and 1, and so if there's a change, it breaks up. With businesses, it's not binary. You can have 10 partners, 30 partners. You can have partners come and go. And when I say partners, I'm talking about owners. So these people come and go, and corporations or entities are designed to allow people coming and going. So it's permitted, unlike with a marriage, it's either, you're either in it or you're out of it. But with a business, even though it's allowed that people come and go, what are the rules of coming and going? That's what one of those business prenuptial agreements would really focus on is, here's how you buy in. Here's how we make the decision to allow new people to join us. Here's what happens if you want to leave. Are we forced to buy you out? If so, at what price? What happens if you die and we need somebody else to come in? Those are the types of things that should be addressed and can be addressed in these business prenuptial agreements, so that you know the rules of the game when necessarily change happens.
And everything is simple before you start making money, right?
Oh yeah, it's simpler.
Yeah, everything is simpler before you start making money. So let's talk about some of those things. Like you said, that prenuptial agreement. One of the things in the startup world that gets thrown around quite a bit is this idea of vesting, right? A period of time that you have to work and fulfill the obligations of your role before you become fully vested. Let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so vesting is indeed often about time. And so the very common example is with the employee stock options. And so you give somebody a stock option, which is a right to buy stock in the future, but at the present day valuation or fair market valuation usually. And so as you can imagine, if a company is going up, it's at $1 now, and then they have the right to buy it for $1 when it's worth $4. That's $3 of profit that they've just made. So that's typically where vesting comes in. It says, we're going to give you this option, but you can't exercise this option until these vesting dates. And a very typical vesting schedule is 4 years with a 1-year cliff. What that means is 100% of the option won't vest until 4 years, but it vests over time. The 1-year cliff means 0% vests until 1 year, and then at 1 year, 25% falls over the cliff and vests. And then it might vest every month or quarter thereafter until you get to 4 years, in which case you're 100% vesting. So that's what vesting means from a time perspective. However, you don't always want it to just be time. It can be based on other milestones. And so, for example, if a CTO is being hired and it's really important that CTO do a successful beta test of the key offering, maybe 50% of their vesting is triggered on that milestone of a successful beta rollout. Or if it's a vice president of sales, maybe a good vesting milestone is when they've achieved $1 million of recurring sales revenue. So don't just always think about it as time. Think about it as achieving certain things. You're trying to incentivize things with vesting. Staying at the company is great, but if you're having somebody stay at a company who's not doing a very good job, are you really accomplishing a lot? So think about both time-based and milestone-based vesting. And this also does apply to founders. So I talked about stock options, but founders, same thing. If a investor comes in, they may say, you know what, there's 2 or 3 founders, you've been working at it for a couple of years, each of you owns a third, but I'm nervous if I invest a couple $1 million. What happens if one of those founders wants to leave or gets a better job elsewhere? So they will ask the founders to sort of do reverse vesting. They still own a third each. They're not getting a right to buy it in the future. They own that. But you can actually start vesting it to say, if you leave within the next year, I get to buy back maybe half of your equity that you currently own. So that's called subject to forfeiture. They forfeit their equity if they leave, or maybe it triggers a buyout right. So vesting can happen both with stock options for employees, but also more like reverse vesting for founders who actually own the stock. They can lose that stock, and sometimes even before you take a significant investment, founders might say, "Hey, we're doing this. It's going to take a long time. I want to protect myself from my future ex-partners. Let's all do this vesting." And almost always they have to do it the same schedule for all the founders to make it fair and equitable. But it's not uncommon for sophisticated founders to say, we got to make sure that if somebody leaves, they don't leave with a third of the company that the company can never use in the future. That can be dangerous.
Okay. Well, big shout out to the chat, man. I love the chat right now. We got Asha Nelms in here. Who else? We got Jonathan Thompson joining us. We got Ridley Walsh. I hope I'm saying that right. Sharik Sadiq. We have a lot of people in here, man. So guys, I need you guys to be more engaged in the chat. Listen, we have an expert here talking all things legal. I don't mind carrying the 30 carries a game, but help me out here in the chat, guys. Feed me some questions. If you have questions about your business, let me know. All right, so let's get a little messy here, Alex. Don't drop any names, but like in the world of marriages, since we're carrying that analogy into business, what are some of the craziest breakups you've seen? Don't name names, man.
Yeah.
What are some folks who didn't do it right, and what were the results of not doing it right? Because we need to hammer away with the audience that this is not where you want to save money in your business. There are real world consequences to not doing this right. So what have you seen out there?
Yeah, so probably the most common real world consequence is litigation. That's when people are suing one another. So if you haven't done things right, or if it's getting messy, people in America will routinely turn to the courts. And when you are suing somebody in court, that's called litigation. I am not a litigator. I'm a transactional attorney. I'm more like the person who gets the people married and then does some marriage counseling. The litigators are the fighters. They're the ones who are in court yelling at each other, arguing on behalf of their client's point of view, and that gets real expensive real quickly. So, my job with my clients is try to avoid that litigation. If we do it as well as we can on the front end, that significantly reduces the chance of litigation on the back end, and it's a lot cheaper. It's that ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure. If you spend maybe a little bit of money and time and be thoughtful on the front end, that reduces your chance of ending up in litigation with your former partner and your former employees on the back end. But yeah, I think we've all seen articles in our local business newspapers about founders no longer being with the company. Things went off the rails, and it happens all the time. In fact, it happens more often than not. At the stage where we find ourselves with startups, unfortunately, about 80% will fail, and that's a rough number. And of that 80%, a lot of those folks, were worthy of success, were worthy of making it, but for one reason or another, it could be they needed $100 million and only got 80. I mean, raising $80 million is great, but doesn't cut it if you needed 100 million, right? So invariably, these things will happen to the best of people, to the best of ideas, to the best management, people with experience. And unfortunately, if you get to that point with litigation, it can get expensive, it can get messy, and it can get pretty embarrassing.
All right, so protect yourself, all right, at all times, right? All right, so let's continue with the role of legal when it comes to fundraising, right? Fundraising is hard. Fundraising is hard. You're going to get a lot of rejection. You're going to get a lot of no's. But maybe when you hear a yes and then you see the terms, you might get excited about accepting those terms. But a good lawyer is there to protect you even when you think this is a good thing for your company. Let's talk about the role of legal in fundraising and also protecting the company from that perspective. Yeah.
So fundraising, unfortunately, is very dangerous. You are dealing with other people's money, and as a result, the danger level, the liability level goes up significantly. And there's two main danger components here. One is securities regulations, like the SEC and state securities regulators. These laws were put in place after the stock market crash, the Great Depression. This was almost a century ago when there was rampant fraud about securities, people getting investors' money. And so the laws came out and said, okay, well, you have to behave well, because if we don't have these laws, people are going to behave poorly. And then Bernie Madoff happened fewer than 10 years ago, and so the SEC said, okay, we've seen fraud again, and this is bad, so we're really going to kind of ratchet up the enforcement of these SEC laws and state regulations. So that's the state side. That's you've got to do things a certain way in order to be compliant with the law. But even if you do all that, the second bucket of danger is just being just exposing yourself to fraud claims, to you oversold me claims. So even if I'm complying with all the regulations and laws out there about raising money, if I tell somebody, hey, you invest in me, you're going to be able to afford a helicopter in a year, and they can't afford a helicopter, or their helicopter isn't big enough, they come after you to say, you oversold me, so I'm not happy with this investment. And remember, if 80% fail, you got an 80% chance that investor is not going to be thrilled with their investment payoff. And if you overpromise, you're on the hook personally for that liability. If you personally talk about buying a helicopter, doesn't matter if you did it through an LLC or an Inc. necessarily, they're going to come after you individually. So very dangerous.
But we're talking about accredited investors, and we all know investors don't make mistakes. They're the smartest people in the world. They ask all the right questions. You can't oversell them, right?
Yeah, almost. So when an accredited investor is unhappy, they run to their attorney and say, find me a way, go after those bums who stole my money and misled me. They never say, I made a bad decision and I should have, thought about it better, and such is life. Instead, they're looking. They might be looking for blood, or you got to assume that they're angry and going to be heading to their lawyer's office to try to get something done. And so that's where doing things correctly, both in terms of regulation, complying with regulations, and avoiding potential fraud claims. That's where we attorneys hopefully start to shine and start to do very well by our clients. So when you're raising money, you mentioned accredited investors, and there's a big reason why that's a huge issue. So the default for raising money is you go public, an IPO, a registered offering. But companies at the startup stage don't do that. First of all, nobody would invest in an IPO for a company that's pre-revenue pretty much. And instead, what they do is they go to the private markets. And if you're going to do a private offering or an exempt offering, then there's different buckets. There's different regimes that you can qualify for. Probably the easiest and most often used regime is raising money from accredited investors, and those are considered to be people who are wealthy enough to protect themselves, to hire their own tax advisors and legal advisors. People who can maybe suffer the risks of a speculative investment that has an 80% failure rate without being destitute and impairing their personal wealth too much. Or they have a level of sophistication. Maybe it's their day job to do this kind of stuff, so they can really protect themselves from a due diligence point of view. But these folks who are called accredited investors will be held. They have to protect themselves a little bit more. So, for example, if you raise money from people who aren't accredited, from a couple of retirees, and they're tapping into their retirement account, the law tends to bend over backwards to protect them. They don't want those people to lose their money in their house like they did during the Great Depression. So the laws are designed to really, really protect those types of individuals, the non-accredited investors. When you do stuff with accredited investors, you don't have to disclose as much. You don't have to put together a private placement memorandum every time with a slew of risk factors that explain to the investors why they're foolish to invest in a company as speculative as yours, which is basically what you have to do. Instead of saying, invest in me, I'll get you helicopter money, you basically have to say, if you invest in me, there's an 80% chance of failure. Now will you write me a check? Accredited investors are used to hearing that. They understand the risks a little better, at least they're supposed to. And so for that reason, just offering and just accepting money from those that are accredited investors is usually a much safer and a less expensive compliance requirement than going to other friends and family who may not be accredited investors themselves.
So I think you said something very important there, especially at the early stages. We hear this thing about, well, you're so early, what we're really investing in is the team. From the legal perspective, though, I know like people use stuff in like startup world, like all this lingo, like you're too early, we're investing in the team. Who are they really investing in, though? They are investing in, what they're buying into is the team. What they're investing in is the business. So where does the line get drawn when you say they might come after you as overpromising? Aren't they really investing in the company?
Yeah, so when they invest, typically it's directly into the company. At this stage, you're putting money into the company, not into the owner's pockets. If a company later sells, that usually the owner, they're getting money into their pocket, or if they, recapitalize, take chips off the table, we call it. But at this stage, none of the money really goes into anybody's pocket. It goes into the company itself, so the company can reinvest that money and use it for rapid growth or scaling.
Wait.
More
Investor
people.
money doesn't belong to me?
Not just yet,
Oh,
but
okay, okay.
there is a light at the.
I'm just double checking, Alex. I got to ask these questions.
I mean, that sounds like a question better for Bernie Madoff, but unfortunately, he's no longer with us. So, but the way most of my clients, who are obviously very well advised, will do it. They understand that this money is going just to the company and is to be used for company purposes. However, these founders, the management team, yes, they are a very attractive and a very important resource for the company. So when an investor says, I'm investing in the management team, they're saying the management team is more important to me, given their experience and track record, hopefully a successful track record, than just the new idea or the widget that they created. I'm investing in this tried and true team who know how to do it and have that record of doing it successfully and creating that return on investment for those investors. So when an investor invests, they are not looking to make you rich. They are not looking to see this company do wonderful things. They are doing it to get a return on that investment, full stop. So if they invest $1 million, they want to get several $1 million back. How they get that back and when they get that back, that matters. But they're not looking to improve the world necessarily. If they can improve the world and make money, great. But they are looking to make money. That's their sole job as a venture capitalist, as a private equity investor, is to get a return on that investment. If they don't get a return on that investment, they can't keep doing these investments. So know that when you're taking that investment, they're not looking to have you succeed necessarily. For example, a founder may take on investors and accept their money. If the founder isn't doing so well, those investors will say, you tried, founder, but now you're fired. Even though you founded the company, we're going to replace you with somebody who can do a better job helping us get our ROI. So when you take investor money, particularly significant amounts of investor money, you're actually getting a boss who at the end of the day could actually either take over the company or cause it to fire you as the founder. Your baby, you're now gone because those investors say you're just not cutting the mustard. So they may invest in the management team, but they won't hesitate to fire that management team if they're not allowing that investor to get that return on investment within a certain amount of time.
Well, talk about the business spilling into the streets. I mean, I won't comment on this too much, but it's in the news now. The situation with Script Drop and a good friend of the show, my man Nick Potts, right? That whole situation is now in the news, right? A lot of stuff that was going on behind the scenes. Very, very unfortunate situation with a great founder who's kind of on to his next startup, and in a company that's doing big things, and we expect that's going to have a very promising future. Again, these things really matter. All right, guys, you guys are letting me carry this show, but that's why I get the big bucks. So, Rochelle, can you please put the poll in the chat? Because we need the feedback, right? Ben Blanquera, Lacey Picasso, all the folks who are putting together this TechLife live thing. Let's go ahead and hang out and do the poll. And let's get your feedback on what you think about what you've heard so far. Do you think this show is great? Is it providing valuable information? Let's go ahead and vote. And then we'll give Alex a chance to talk about something that's coming up from Dickinson Wright, right? You guys have an event that's coming up. So why don't we share some information, and Rochelle's going to put that link in the chat so you guys can sign up for that as well. So Alex, take it away.
Yeah, so we are sponsoring and supporting a little seminar coming up on June 2nd here downtown, but we're trying to get international folks in here. It's the Healthcare Capital Markets and Innovation Summit. And so it's designed to be any startups, any entrepreneurs, any investors who are on involved in healthcare in any way. And in my case, it's a lot of healthcare tech, biotechnology, et cetera. We're having a all-day seminar to try to connect people, provide some content. I'll be talking about the anatomy of a deal in healthcare tech. And so there's a website, healthcarecapitalmarkets.com. So check it out, and hopefully we'll have some attendees from this live session.
Yeah, I mean, healthcare is big business. We're known for insurance. I think we're making in Columbus 2 plays right now to be known for healthcare, biotech, and for clean energy. So if you guys are in here and you're thinking about building a healthcare company, or you are part of a healthcare company, go ahead and click register. share this link with people. We want to not just be a one-trick pony, right? We want to be a city with insurance companies and car tech companies and clean energy companies. It's going to create a lot of opportunity. It's going to give us a better chance of attracting capital because, as you know, a lot of venture firms specialize in different areas. So I would love to see some venture investors that specialize in clean and sustainable technology setting up offices here. But we need to have the startups that are started, that are growing, and then producing employees, right? That grow up as part of that company, starting companies of their own. So awesome, guys. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. Listen, I like the strongly agree and the agrees. And for everybody who didn't take the poll, you know I can see you, right? You know I could literally see you not take the poll, all right? This is live, and I know who's in the chat. But guys, listen, we're going to wrap this thing up with Alex. I just have one more question. It's not really a question. It's about how do people get a hold of you? What can they expect when they engage with you? And let's deal with the all important question, right? Hey, you know, financially, what are we looking at here, depending on what we want to do with you? So why don't you share that?
Yeah, so the good news, or maybe the bad news about attorneys is we're always reachable. You just go to our website, dickinsonwright.com, and you'll be able to find me and all my other colleagues on the website with our full contact information, email address, phone number. We make ourselves available to people, saying, hey, I either was referred to you by a client or another service provider, or I saw you at at the 614 seminar, and I thought you weren't terribly incomprehensible, and so we network and hold ourselves out there, even if we're not a great fit for a potential client. Happy to have that initial discussion to talk about what's going on, see whether we're a fit. And one of the things that I and most other lawyers will do is if we're not the right fit, we will probably try to guide you to somebody who is the right fit. So yeah, it's not one size fits all. Most law firms at our size, have pretty high rates, and there are reasons for that. We do a lot of advising to a lot of large companies, and that's our point. That's our price point. When it comes to some folks, they just can't meet that, can't accept that price point. That we understand that it's not a one size fits all approach. There's a lot of attorneys out there, and I'll always try to send somebody to the right person to do the best job. But once again, just like with any lawyer, you want somebody who's going to listen and make sure that the advice is appropriate for the stage and the size. And sometimes that isn't Dickinson Wright, but we sure try to make it as progressive as possible and help out as much as possible. With startups, we usually work with more set fees, more not to exceeds, to make sure that nothing gets that we have fewer surprises on the back end when it comes time to render that bill.
Yeah, awesome, Alex. And then one last question. I thought that was going to be the last thing, man. I was going to have you have that as the final word, but guys, everything is in the chat, okay? So the information for the upcoming event is in the chat. How to get a hold of Alex is in the chat. And if you want to hop on our mailing list, that's in the chat, which you should hop on the mailing list. That's how you get all this information. But Alex, one of the craziest things of being a podcast host here in Columbus, Ohio, is that listen, I need to go out and raise a fund, right? I know part of what you do is that you're an investor. So the cool thing is that you see these deals, right? Yeah. And I know you can't talk about them from a legal perspective, but I don't know if you could talk about it from an investor perspective. What are some companies that you're really excited about? Some companies maybe that you've invested in? Because I think, they get a twofer with you, right? They get that legal and then they might get some money. So let's talk about that side of the work that you do.
Well, before any of my clients or potential clients get too excited, I'm a limited partner in a couple of local funds, including Ohio Tech Angel Funds and Rev 1 Fund 2. So it might not be me investing personally, but it's indirectly. I invest in the fund, and then that fund invests in these companies. And so yeah, you want to watch out for having an attorney who's also an investor. Because are they advising you as an investor, or are they advising you as an attorney? You want a neutral attorney to say, that's a bad idea, or don't take that money, don't do that deal. Investors are looking for that ROI. So not always the best bet to have an attorney who's also an investor per se. But yeah, indirectly through Rev One and How Tech Angel Funds, there's a number of good companies out there. ScriptDrop is one of those companies. My funds have invested in those in ScriptDrop, and we would love to see them succeed. There's always these significant bumps in the road, and we're sorry to see that. But boy, everybody who's invested has a vested interest in seeing that company succeed. Even somebody who's an ex founder, an ex CEO, they still want to see that company succeed because they probably still own a good bit of the equity. So everybody wants to see these companies succeed. Another company that seems to be hitting it out of the park is MentorClick. Mentoring software. They're at the right place at the right time. Maybe not the most sexy technology and piece of software, but boy, they seem to be firing on all cylinders. And as an OTAF investor, we are very excited about their future.
All right, Alex, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Listen, man, you're a superstar. All right, you deserve your own show on the 614 Startups channel. Maybe we'll do a show just for you where you talk legal all day. Guys, if you're not listening to the 614 Startups podcast, what are you doing with your life? Right? You can get this kind of action every week. So get it together, head to 614startups.com, join the mailing list, and listen to episodes, information like this. Get to know these folks so that when you see them out and about, you can spark a conversation and you have something that they can resonate with you. Thank you for joining us on another episode, guys. Peace. Alex, dude, great job, man.